This meeting will be video recorded, available on the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov, also on Channel 18, and pursuant to the numerous emergency
Recording in progress.
pursuant to the numerous emergency orders with Governor Baker, this is a Zoom meeting, and we're all set. So the first order of business is the minutes that Rich nicely put together, and I sent those around. Does anyone have any corrections, comments, additions, subtractions, whatever? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, Russ, do I have a second?
Second.
That was Roy, I think, was the first one I heard. Okay, we've got to go through the roll. Now let me see. Did Mary George, are you on?
Yes.
And Mary, you're on?
Yes,
now?
I'm on.
Okay, so we'll go through the roll on the minutes. Steve?
Yes.
Roy?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
And Jerry's a yes, so it's 8-0. Okay. The next order of business is thinking about a clerk. It is
Jerry, we have 9 members here.
Yeah, 9-0. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I didn't count myself. That's all right. Thank you, Steve. As Steve reminded me, and I knew, we're required on the charter to elect a clerk. Not a vice chair, but we have one of those, but a clerk. And we don't have one yet. And I think that, as I said in an email I sent out to everyone, I think that it's for us to, the finance committee, for trying to require the town to pay to have the minutes done doesn't seem to make any sense. I think that what we have to think about is the minutes don't have to be as detailed as they have been, clearly not as detailed as Karen had done, but I'm taking minutes today, but we need to have a clerk or some plan. We still have to have a clerk, but we might have rotating who's taking the minutes. Like there are 9 of us, so once every 9 months we would take the minutes or whatever. But I leave that open to you. So the first thing, is there any nomination for anyone to be the clerk? All right, hearing none, let's go to kind of a plan of how we want to deal with minutes if we don't have a specific person as the clerk taking minutes at every meeting. My idea of rotating it, does that make sense to anyone? Are people really opposed to that? Whatever, we still would probably, we're still required by law to elect someone as clerk, but let's see if we can take the job and split it up and then have a clerk in name only, probably.
I wouldn't put it that way, Jerry. This is a matter of state law, so we could all help the clerk.
We can help the clerk.
I would say it that way. But
okay, so
I have two questions, if I may.
Yeah.
One, is this discussion mean that we have ascertained that our former clerk does not wish to serve?
Yes, at this point, unless Mary says something otherwise right now.
I don't feel that I have the time to do it, given my other and assortment of
obligations with the town.
Okay, fair enough. The second question I have is, it goes to the point you were making, Jerry, about spending money on this. Karen was doing it before. An excellent job, I think, by the way. But has Karen been replaced?
Yes, by Lori Barr.
So what's changed? Is it that Jackie and Rich, I'll let you answer this, of course, feel that that was not a good investment of time, or is there something else changed? Because I think that's a better, more consistent, more efficient way of doing it. And while it would only be once every 9 months, I, for one, would hate that month.
I'll
And
second
probably
that.
wouldn't be as good at it as someone else might be, other than Mary. So my question is there any reason why major committees are frequently staffed? In fact, invariably staffed.
I
Yeah,
agree.
Lori's just starting out, and it's a little bit of a upgraded role where she's a HR coordinator and has her hands full with a number of HR matters. So since I'm here, in lieu of her doing it, I'd just assume, if you need or want, whatever the case may be, a staff member to do it, I'm happy to do it and prefer just to do it that way. I'd rather not have to have someone come in off hours when she's working a full-time job. I'm here anyway. So that'd be my preference. If you want a staff person,
I'd certainly defer to your judgment on that in terms of her availability and whether that's wise or not. And I don't want to give you assignments, but if you're an eager volunteer or a willing volunteer, it sounds good to me.
Well, if you liked the minutes that you just approved, that's probably about the extent that I would ever go. So,
Well, that's often healthy, as a matter, in my opinion.
and then of course, these are recorded. So, if you need more detail or more items of discussion, you could always go to the recording.
Right, right.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that sounds fine. I still need someone with that understanding to be the clerk. Mary, with that understanding, are you willing to be the clerk?
I'm willing to review the minutes that Rich or somebody similar town official would put together, as I've always done since I've been named the clerk. So I would be happy to do that part, but I just don't feel that I've got the time to do what Rich or Karen have done in the past.
So in that understanding, I'd be happy to nominate Mary if that's in order.
Well, the nomination is accepted. Is there a second to that nomination?
I second the nomination.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, nominations are closed, so we're going to vote to electing Mary as the clerk. Steve?
Yes.
Roy?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Tom? Are you muted, Tom?
He looks like he's frozen there.
That's
And
what
he
it
keeps
looks
having
like to
to,
me.
He keeps going out and coming in, so I think he's stuck.
Oh, he's
Here he is
stuck.
again.
Okay. Russ?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Mary?
I'm going to abstain since I'm voting
Yeah.
for myself.
And Jerry votes yes. Let's see, is Tom back yet?
I am, and I'll vote yes, but also this is like the third or fourth time that I've been dropped from this. I've been having Wi-Fi problems all day, and I've got pretty good Wi-Fi here, so I don't know what's going on, but it may continue to happen. I apologize.
That's all right.
I'll keep trying to dial in.
I was going to say it's a sign, Tom. What can I say? But okay, that was, so Mary, you're the clerk, 801. All right, the next item of business, Rich had sent around a financial management plan, summary, and then the full plan that he is going to bring to the select board later this month, and wanted to broach it with the finance committee first. So, Rich, the chair is yours. Go ahead.
All right. Guess what I'll do is I'll just share the screen of the presentation that I'd sent out. And I'm not going to go through
Okay.
a lot of it, but might serve as a guide for some discussion. And
Okay. It's up, Rick.
this first page here is just with the Government Finance Officers Association, which is a national organization for finance officers, and issues a lot of guidance and best practices and policy suggestions. This is what they have to say about financial management practices, most of which all of which I would agree with, as well as some other things. Typically, when I talk to towns about it, they're really interested in the fourth one here, supporting a good bond ratings and the reduction of the cost of borrowing. But from my experience, the next one is actually really important, practically speaking, long-term and strategic thinking, which I don't think we have as much of a problem with in Eastham as I've seen in other communities. So we're already kind of ahead of the games without having the policies. The second page here, speaking to this criteria of supporting good bond ratings, I summarized this is the framework that Standard & Poor's uses to rate municipalities throughout the United States. This isn't unique to Eastham. We participate in that process, and one of the reasons I wanted to start getting this out there now, especially in the event that if people want to see this a couple times, we have a borrowing that we have to cut that's coming up for the Town Center Plaza. Plus, we have a rollover of short-term bond anticipation notes, and we have ongoing borrowing related to the water project, all which require updates to our bond rating. And so here's what S&P looks at, these criteria, and here's the weight of those scores. And you'll notice that the first two items are out of our control. Institutional framework has to do with the state and local government finance regulations and laws. Nothing that we can do. All communities in Massachusetts are rated strong. The economy is largely out of our control, if not all. We do technically get a downgrade because of our small town, remote small town, without a lot of industry. But we benefit by several years ago, an agency of the federal government, which name escapes me at the moment, classified Barnstable in parts of Yarmouth as a MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. And we belong and participate in that MSA. And given our strong tourist economy and our participation in the MSA that has all kinds of transportation hubs and links, economy is now rated as very strong, and probably likely is going to continue that way for the foreseeable short-term future. It does change periodically. Management, now you see the next several are things that we can control and have influence over. Of those items, the management ranking and score is worth the most. It's worth 20%. And in the past, we've been rated as strong, and the detriments, or decrements, I should say, in the past have been to the experience of finance staff and lack of capacity, both of which we have worked on in the last couple of years, and particularly the last year. And another key factor in that ranking is lack of formal policies, financial management policies. So that's why I'm putting these forth now for discussion, so hopefully we can get these adopted in advance of our next rating call and rating analysis. We can demonstrate we've improved capacity and financial capability, and we can demonstrate that we have financial management policies in place. There's no reason we can't get that to a very strong ranking. And you notice that the other ones are already considered very strong, and budget flexibility and liquidity have, if anything, improved. Budgetary performance has been considered adequate, in my opinion, and I'd make the case that S&P that has improved at least to a strong, if not a very strong. And then the weakest link of it all is our debt and contingent liabilities, in which they're giving us decrements because of a high level of debt, but which is a pet peeve of mine, because they have all kinds of policies and guidance that talks about how you secure debt, how it's funded, how it's paid for. And in our case, it's secured by our safest revenue source, which is property tax, because these are all exempt debt issues. We always have the ability to issue a tax levy to pay for this debt, regardless of economic conditions, which might be of a concern if you had a high tax rate, which we don't. We're still in the bottom third in Massachusetts of tax burden. So to me, I think this very weak, should not be very weak. It certainly wouldn't be very strong, but at least inadequate. So in any event, I think we have the ability to improve in a couple of these areas, and I think we will. And then having the financial management policies is kind of one of the key cornerstones of getting that done. So I drafted some policy. Steve, did you have something?
I have a question, Rich.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I was muted. Why don't you go, George, and I'll follow you.
Okay. Rich, have you contested with Standard & Poor's their rating of very weak? I mean, have you actually had a point-by-point discussion with them where you've expressed your disagreement and the basis for that disagreement? And if you have, how have they responded to that?
I certainly have. And so like lots of things nowadays, it's not like the good old days. There used to be a guy, his name was Carl Jacob, and he actually lived on the Cape. He knew the towns, and you could call him. And back in those days, they would actually come out and do visits. They wouldn't just do this over the phone, fill out a checklist and send it to us, and then we'll have a call with you. Carl Jacob would come out, tour the town with you, have lunch with you, give you the opportunity to show them, the best side of you. I remember I did this in Harwich a long time ago. And of course, we drove him down to Quasit and to the harbor and had lunch at Brack's Landing. All this, and I brought him all the good spots in town. But he got it, and it wasn't a checklist. Nowadays, so Carl's since retired. His assistant, who took over from him, has moved on, and you get young finance guys into these roles that follow a checklist. Because back in the last recession, part of the problem, as the federal government saw it, was inadequate oversight of these rating agencies that they thought were overrating the capacity of their municipalities. And so they wanted it to be a very transparent process as to how municipalities were rated, and that you always looked at the same things everywhere, and you had the checklist. And unfortunately, what that creates, and it's the same thing in the audit industry, which I was a part of for 25 years, when you have audit programs and checklists, people learn the checklist, they don't learn to think for themselves. And so, it's very hard to convince a young analyst that's not very experienced, that hasn't seen these things, that's following the checklist. Of course, they won't send me their checklist, so I can't, counterpoint it that way. So the answer is yes, but it's difficult because they just don't have an in-depth understanding of the way it used to be with the older analysts. So it's an ongoing process. We have it's called a financial advisor that helps us with every bond issue. So I've been talking to them off and on any number of matters over the last year, and every chance I get, I make sure that they understand my perspective on the debt and how it's voted and funded and secured, so that they can convey those, and just little by little trying to peck away at their belief system, so that when I speak to them at the rating call, they'll have heard, it won't be the first time they heard it, and they'll have hopefully had time to process it and understand the information.
Well, Rich, have they shared with you what they think Eastham has to do in order to improve its rating on this characteristic? I mean,
So they have ratios. So if your debt service ratio, your outstanding debt exceeds a certain amount per capita, or if your debt exceeds a certain amount over your budget, they downgrade you. And that's as far as the checklist goes. But when you read through the guidance, they are supposed to take into consideration, I mean, not all debt's created equal. What if you issue a lot of debt, but it's secured by, some sort of rate structure, or that's very solid, or some other revenue source. So the fact that you have debt in and of itself isn't bad, as long as you have a mechanism to pay for it. So all they're doing is going through the ratios and the checklist, but not necessarily accounting or considering the fact that we've secured the funding of it. And so that's kind of what I kind of got to get through to them.
Steve?
Thanks, Jerry. Before I ask I have a question on budgetary performance, but just a short follow-up to George's question. Does S&P have an appeals procedure?
Yeah, you got 24 hours after they issue the report, and it never is very rarely.
I was thinking more on a longer-term basis. I mean, this young analyst shouldn't be the last word for a national rating organization such as Standard & Poor's.
Well, and of course, it's not just where, like I mentioned, Carl Jacob, he worked in Massachusetts, period. And then later in his career, I think it was Southern New England. So he did a little bit of Rhode Island, maybe a little bit of Connecticut. But he understood Massachusetts finance. He knew what exempt debt meant. All the analysts now work on a national basis. So, this week he's looking at Eastham, next week he's looking at, someplace out in Nebraska.
Okay, so I get the problems with our analysts, but that's a big organization.
Yeah.
I guess you're saying, no, there really isn't. It would seem to me that whether it's a private corporation or it's a municipality, there ought to be a vehicle for having a major policy discussion beyond the analyst.
Well,
If anything, they should want to have consistency across analysts and across the country.
Well, exactly.
Anyway,
And so my approach is going to be, as I've been talking to our financial advisors for a while about this issue. So in advance of the next rating update, doing exactly what you just said, Steve, is kind of what I'd like to do, is not only talk to the analysts, although I don't know if they'll let me do that, but at least to that analyst or assigned analyst's boss, right? Just to explain, to the extent RFA can tell us who that is, and make sure that they understand the issue as well.
Well, and I understand you don't want to tick him off too badly because he's going to be staying with us.
Right.
So I understand
That's
that.
the fine line. Yeah.
Anyway, let me get to the question I had on budgetary performance. It's adequate now. You're hopeful it'll be improved. But what is it that makes it only adequate?
Thank you, Steve.
We're required by law to balance the budget. We do. We have a modest number of overrides. And what is it that they expect of us that we haven't been able to show them?
What do we need to do to make it better than adequate?
There's a lot of factors that go into it, but to boil it down, if you had a return of, so you're right, we have a balanced budget. So everything being equal, if our revenues came in exactly as anticipated and our expenditures were exactly as appropriated and budgeted, we'd have no surplus for the year. What they want to see on budgetary performance is for a very strong, probably a 5% savings. So in other words, between unspent appropriations that get closed back to the general fund and revenues in excess of what we budgeted, totaling up to 5%.
So they want us to tax our citizens more than we need to. Just saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, it's kind of an arbitrary checklist thing. So on a $32 million budget, that's about $1.6 million. So actually, last year we hit that, and likely we'll hit it this year, especially since we're not even budgeting the short-term rental money by and large. So in the current years, we will have met that. But again, it's very checklist oriented. I mean, 5% of a budget is nothing if you could have less of a return on your budget, but other things, you could be properly funded, right? Or have high level reserves, or you could, provide for things another way. So there's all kinds of other things that can happen other than just a straight return on your budget. But basically that's what they're looking for.
All right.
And the easiest measure is so they'll go through the calculation and I'll go through it and I'll put it in front of them. But the easiest measure is just look at the amount of free cash. So when I do a year-end update, one of the things you'll see is what's our free cash expected to be and how much of it was generated from this year versus what was carried forward from prior years.
Okay, that's helpful.
What-
Thank you.
Yeah, Rich, with the putting funds into the stabilization fund, if you budgeted that, do they look at that as part of a surplus or,
No, that's not budgetary performance. That's budget flexibility and liquidity.
all right,
So like to Steve's
Okay.
points though, if you're a town that relies on free cash to fund your capital program, then you need to be generating savings because that generates free cash that you can use to fund your capital program. But what if
Yes.
you do like what we did and are funding some tax levy to fund our capital program, therefore we don't need that much free cash as another town, therefore we don't generate it. I mean, it's an arbitrary factor. So, if we had
Yeah.
that problem, I would be arguing that argument, but the last couple of years we don't because of the short-term rentals.
all right. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, the floor is yours again, Rich.
All right. All right, let's back up.
Whoops.
Everybody.
You had it and you lost.
Oh, I did, okay. Hang on.
There you go, you're back.
All right. So, fortunately, I, know a little bit about these things and how S&P works. So I've been approached by a number of towns over the years to develop financial management policies. And so the policies that we are suggesting have drafted and presented to you kind of follow that same path, similar to what Yarmouth has, similar to what Nantucket has, similar to, I think, Brewster and some others. But bottom line is, they're not a how-to of how to do anything. They're not overly prescriptive. They're appropriately, in my mind, high-level policy guidance from a select board and a finance committee. And they're practical and they're measurable. And in our case, most of the things that are in there have already been, informally adopted as policies. Like, for example, this past year, where we adopted the 400,000 of override through the tax levy for capital. That's part of the budget policy that we ought to appropriate that for capital, but of course, we already did that and already know that. Setting aside the new 2% for, new programs, community service type programs or community assistance types programs, that's one of the policies. Those are things that we already identified and talked about in our doing. And these are all things and policies that S&P wants to see. So that's why they're in there. And this is just a summary of them. I took a little bit of liberties making some assumptions, but that's for you and the select board to review to make sure you're okay with it. I think it's okay. But those are contained within the introduction and the scope, talking about some long-term financial management objectives. The first main policy is a general financial management policy that directs the town administrator to make sure that a more detailed set of policies and more likely procedures are developed and documented on all the financial offices. So how do you maintain internal control over receivables and turnovers of cash and cash reconciliations and budget monitoring, things like that. Those are all things that will get in place. We have some of those in place already, some formally, some informally, but this codifies it that that's a financial management policy of the select board. And why is it the select board is important? Because S&P and auditors and other oversight agencies always want those charged with governance, is kind of the phrase, to have adopted these policies. And in our case, that's the select board. Budget policies basically is, it has to do with budget development. And this is the family support package and the capital plan funding, use of the 2% rooms excise. It also goes to our budget flexibility and management scores. a revenue policy, which is basically saying that we would like to have a balanced budget, which in Massachusetts is a requirement. So of course we have a balanced budget. But the other thing this also says, it talks about the different types of revenues. You know, some revenues, not all revenues are created equal. Some are more stable, some are more variable. And so we should be accounting for that in our budget development. And I added an extra element in there that, which was what our practice has been since I got here. And it's the practice in several towns where we're budgeting, targeting a budget of about 80 to 85% of our local estimated receipts to be used in the budget balancing process, which means that you're always going to have, if you achieve that, you're always going to have about 15% of excess revenues to actual. On the other hand, we would be allowed, according to this policy, to adopt a use of estimated receipts of 85 to 90%, but that would infer that things are tightening, and that should be a discussion that we have with the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And then we're also allowed to go from anything over 90 up to 100% of our local receipts, which is the state law. We can never adopt more than 100% of our prior year actuals. So this policy would allow us to do it, but if we hit that threshold of 90%, that we need to highlight that and communicate that to the Finance Committee and the Select Board in our budget development process to make sure that they understand that things are real tight. And why would that happen? In an economic downturn, we would expect our local receipts to go down 15 to 20, you know, anywhere, depending on the severity, anywhere between 10, 15 to 20% is the worst I've ever seen. A financial planning policy, which basically is, we do a 5-year capital plan, but one of the things I want to add is a 5-year operating budget projection. And S&P wants to see that. I was able to get one together last year for them, which they appreciated, but it's not part of a policy or requirement. And so this codifies that and something I would do, and perhaps you might want to see that and talk about that in your meetings. A debt management policy, which talks about benchmarks for the amount of debt we would issue. And in our case, we do have a lot of debt relative to our budget, but it's secured. So that policy talks about, you know, I think I put in 10%, which is a pretty common budget target for debt service, but we're allowed to go over that amount if it's secured by rates or taxpayer exclusions, which are common items. In our case, we are over at 10% of our debt service, but all of our debt is secured by a debt exclusion, so they're secured. Reserve and liquidity policy has to do with what you mentioned earlier, Jerry, with the stabilization fund and other reserves. What are you targeting and where and how much? And then finally, a contingent liabilities policy, which recognizes our obligations formally off the balance sheet, but now everything's on our balance sheet when we issue our audit. And that's our pension and OPEB liabilities and how we are addressing that. And currently the policy as it was written was we're on a funding plan for the pension up to 2038. And that to the extent we have available one-time sources like excess free cash or the ability to recover through a rate setting process, additional funds to direct to our OPEB to account for those costs, that we could do that as well. So that's the quick and dirty summary of those policies, but basically it's 8 sections of the policy document.
So, Rich, currently, we don't really have, Eastham doesn't really have any kind of financial policy document at the moment, or is this replacing something that is more general or what?
I don't think we have any formal policy document. I think we might have some, you know, one-pagers on specific issues saying this is what we're going to do. And certainly, as I've understood from Jackie, as I've asked questions, she's told me things that the Select Board has indicated, but nothing as comprehensive as this that kind of pulls it all into one spot.
Well, Rich, is it accurate to say that what you've tried to do is to put down in writing in one place things that have been going on in Eastham for a long time? You did mention one thing, which is the 5-year projected operating budget. That sounds like it's something that's relatively new. You said you tried to do it this past year, but that sounds like it's a new operating policy. Is that a fair characterization of what this document is? It's a compilation in writing of what's been going on?
Yes, yep. And you're right, the 5-year operating projection would be, one of the new things. But it's something, I mean, regardless of a policy, I gotta do it. I mean, I can't do financial planning for the town. I can't do a capital budget not knowing what the operating budget looks like. I need to know in advance if we're hitting a crunch, for that affects collective bargaining, how much we can offer for raises. If we adopted a certain stance on funding or appropriations, are we gonna be pushing up against our levy limit? So regardless of S&P and a policy, I mean, I kind of have to do that. So, and that's a best practice, and any, forward-thinking organization is kind of doing that.
Well, Rich, I would be curious to know your opinion as to what impact the adoption of this financial policy document, what impact that's going to have on our credit rating from S&P, because I'm looking at the criteria that you just went over, and the financial policy piece addresses the management criteria, and that's already strong. So if we put it in writing, maybe we go to very strong.
Correct.
But if that one criteria changes from strong to very strong, what do you think might be the overall impact on our credit rating?
I think, and this is just me talking out loud, I don't know this for sure, but my sense of it is if we got a very strong in our management score, it's the highest scored, not controllable factor. That makes us a AAA in and of itself. I would feel much more confident if I get that budget performance score up a notch. I think the two of those combined almost solidifies it. And then if I can hit the trifecta and get them to an better understanding on the debt and contingent liabilities, and even that goes up just a little notch to just weak instead of very weak, I think that seals it. So, I mean, it's all moving parts, but timing's everything. Maybe the economy goes down and our institutional score or economic score goes down at the same time. That's why, there's a number of factors, but all things being equal, I think getting that management score up that one notch gets us a AAA, and I think we can make progress on all of them. So I'm hopeful that we will get a AAA.
I always have felt if you had a policy written down for guidance for people, and especially with changeover, the select board, you have elections, there are 5 people on and off the finance committee, new people.
Just lost you.
He's muted now.
And we just
Yeah, it said the host muted me. I don't know what
Yeah,
happened.
sorry, I was trying to click myself and the box is shifting.
Yeah, I know, I got it. It works. If you got the power in the button, but it helps to have it written down, because you have turnover in staff, you have turnover in the select board, you have turnover in the finance committee. And I just think that regardless of what Standard & Poor's done, I think that just makes sense for the town to have that for some consistency and to help in planning for the future.
Jared?
Yes.
I have 2 questions for Rich, if I may. One is on budget policy and the other is on debt management policy. In the more detailed information that the actual policies that the select board will consider, under budget policies, the draft says the annual budget presented will first secure core services and required mandates. Is there a definition of core services? Does that change from year to year? And isn't any recurring revenue, doesn't that become core? I mean, so I'm not understanding that.
So, yes, core services probably changes from year to year depending on who's on the board and who your administrator is, I guess. So it's subject to change. It's a loose term of art, I guess. But it's an indicator to S&P. The reason that's in there is S&P always wants to know, what are you going to do if these revenues don't pan out? How are you going to trim your budget? And, so core services, any, select board or the finance committee could have any number of positions on that. But I'm assuming that, I don't know, Eastham's a small town, everything's important. But in Yarmouth, it was public safety. Public safety was going to be preserved no matter what. First thing cut was town hall and administration, inspections. Then we went to community service type programs like libraries and COAs. And then we went to DPW. And then
So
probably-
Rich, if I may, what I'm hearing, there may be no alternative to do this, but it really has no practical bearing on what the town administrator, town manager, and the select board do when you prepare a budget. It's whatever you want the core service to be, that'll be in the budget.
it's more of the opposite if you have to cut. So if there's things that we can't, so if we had a balanced budget last year and we thought everything was important, before we added anything new, we would make sure that the things that we previously thought were important were ongoing and secured.
So that's what I'm basically saying. Your recurring revenue, your recurring items are pretty much by definition core.
True, yeah.
Okay, I got that. The debt management question I had is, again, that more detailed policy that the select board will consider. Has the debt service that's funded either from the general fund or through exempt to Proposition 2.5 votes, not to exceed 25% of the general fund budget? My memory is horrible, I'm sure, but that 25% sounds really high,
It is high.
really high.
But the first level that you didn't read is general fund debt service exclusive of debt funded from dedicated revenues, and probably should be an and in there, and raised via voter approved debt exclusions will not exceed 10%. So 10% is the first threshold. But if we had debt above and beyond what our general operating budget is supporting, that we could go up to a higher level if it was secured by other recurring revenues.
I'm not sure I understand this, but maybe we could have an offline conversation someday.
Well,
if you want to
this-
belabor this.
I know this isn't what we're doing, but let's, for sake of argument, say that we funded all our water debt through a water rate. It's not on the tax rate, it would be on a water rate. We had collected a sufficient, had a reasonable water rate that could collect enough money to pay for the operating budget and all the debt service. Why, that's secured, it's paid for through that rate. Why would that count towards a 10% of your general fund tax levy budget? And the answer is it probably wouldn't. That's why there's two thresholds. So 10% of the general fund tax levy budget, and in no case should it exceed 25%, which you're right is a high number because that's kind of the upper limit. But you've got to have anywhere between that 10 and 25%, you've got to have other dedicated revenues that are funding that extra debt.
Okay, I know, Roy, you have a question. Steve, you done there with your questions or what?
Yeah, I'm done, yes.
You're done, yeah, you're cooked. George, you had your hand up and then Roy?
Yeah, I've got a question on the financial planning policy, item number 5. And this, I think, goes back to the new thing that you've added, which is the town administrator preparing a 5-year operating budget projection. But, it's one thing to adopt a policy, and obviously that's a very important first step in good financial management, financial planning. But that adopting the policy is only the first step. The next step, as I'm reading this item number 5, is to constantly monitor how you're performing against the policy. Now, I guess my question is, there's a sentence in here that I would like to have you sort of expand on. It says that the town administrator shall prepare year-end financial reports and a year-end financial audit. Analysis and reporting of key results should be used to identify the town's status with regard to the select board's adopted financial policies. Does that mean that the town administrator is going to have to do a report card every year as to performance as against the details in the financial plan? Because that's what it sounds like to me. And that, you know, from the standpoint of Standard & Poor's rating our financial management, financial performance, would be a really strong show that we've gone to the next level, not only adopting the policy, but we will also prepare an annual performance report against the policy. Is that the concept that you're getting to in that item 5?
You got it exactly right. And of course, Jackie won't do that. I'll do that on her behalf. We already do year-end financial reports as required by the Department of Revenue. We already do get an annual audit. One thing that I'll add in the mix on that, I'm hoping to have done for this year, you know, being the first time, the timing might be a little off, but I usually do in most communities a year-end financial review, which reviews the status of appropriations, status of revenues, levels of free cash, levels of reserves, all the things that are measured in our financial management policies. And that, yes, it would be in that update, that year-end review. And, you know, you don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I prepare it. I did one last year just for my own benefit, after the fact. It's at the very end of that big budget book that you all got. Yes, I would do that. And I do that for my own purposes. And then when we deliver a budget in December and January, that budget communication to the Finance Committee and Select Board would reference any of those factors that are contained in that update as they pertain to the next year's budget.
Right. Okay, George. Roy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of questions. The first one on the general financial management policy, which is item 2 or number 2. Would you consider adding a short section in there with respect to people in the financial area adhering to the code of ethics and standard of conduct that are in the financial policies? I'm just thinking of that for your young analysts who walk in the door and review their different criteria.
I like
That kind of reaffirms the financial policies of the town, and it puts it right in front for them to see.
I like what you're saying, but I'm not sure what are you referring to as far as our code of conduct or ethics?
It's 10.1 and 10.2 in policies and procedures of the town.
10.1 in the document that I sent?
No,
Oh,
no, this is independent of it.
oh, okay.
That's where your code of ethics and standard of conduct is found.
Yep.
And I think that's something that the government finance officers recommends too.
Probably right. I mean, I think by default, if it's in the policies of the town, people are supposed to, you know, supposedly they're already
Right.
adhering to it, but this just reaffirms it. So
Right.
that's a valid, strong point.
And back on Steve's question, in terms of 25% debt of the general fund budget, the only comment I would have there, again, concerns your young analyst. Would that in some way jump right out at him or her? And
I hope it does.
You hope it does?
I want him to ask me so I can explain it to him for the 12th time.
Okay. As long as I can remember it this time.
You you put
I
it
like
in
the
a
way of
municipal
thinking,
word,
Rich.
she is- Yeah, I like it.
The problem with, not the problem, but we're about, our debt service budget is about 15%, as I recall.
Hmm.
So if we just put the traditional 10% level, we're already over it.
Right,
So now we're out of compliance with our own policy. What do
right.
we do? And we still got, another 20 million to go. So, but I thought it real important that, there's lots of people that are over the 10%, but they've got, somebody else paying for the debt or any number of revenue sources that are dedicated to the debt. So it's not problematic. The fact that we have debt, if we had a lot of debt that was excluded and we had the highest tax rate in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that's a problem. But when you've got a lot of debt and you're in the bottom third of tax burden, I'm not saying it couldn't be better, but it's not as bad as it could be.
Right. And my last question is on the revenue policy, just for my information. In terms of general local receipts target, what was it for 2021 and for 21, 22? Were we in the 80 to 86%, 85%
Yes,
target?
both years.
Both years. Okay, thank you.
And the 21, I just came in at the tail end of that, but made some adjustments because of COVID. We were down maybe even under 80% a little bit because we weren't at the time, weren't certain that those things would materialize. We thought we were going to get a huge hit. And then this year I targeted 80. I think we ended up at 84, 80, maybe right at 85.
Okay, thank you.
Any, well, then, Mary,
Rich, in the whole scheme of things regarding our whole financial plan, we're all aware that currently interest rates are extremely, extremely low. And how does that affect the whole financial plan? And what I'm thinking is if you're thinking of doing things like we're doing the water, wouldn't it be better to take on the debt when the interest rates are extremely low rather than waiting to put the debt on later when the interest rates might be high?
Yeah, to the extent we've got borrowing, yeah. If we're able to self-finance something, then I guess that's not a big consideration. So that's, part of what I'm gonna look at this upcoming year when we start the capital budget plan. Do we do your 5-year capital budget? So I wanna see those things that are high priorities, high need, that are on the table for, this year and the next, and maybe the third year. And, and if there's an opportunity, if you have a number of those things, maybe there's an opportunity to bundle them. And I can approach the finance committee to see what they think about advancing those and bonding them now as opposed to waiting. But, forewarn you though, we just did get a draft report on our wastewater. And so we're gonna have to be doing some discussion on our wastewater needs, which could be substantial.
When you say you've got a report on the wastewater, who did you get the report from, or what?
The engineers that Jane Crowley's been working with to do an analysis of our TMDLs and nitrogen loadings throughout our watersheds and how we might remedy the overloading of nitrogen in the watersheds.
They've been working on that report for a couple of years. So
Right.
you finally got a draft?
Yes, just recently.
well, we can raise that in the next agenda item, which is capital projects. We'll have a little discussion on that if you want to. Anything else on this for Rich on the financial management plan presentation that he's going to, Steve?
Yeah, Rich, last May, I think it was the Department of Revenue, there was a financial review that the town cooperated with, and there were many recommendations that came out of that. I skimmed it, came across it accidentally, and I skimmed it, and a lot of what's in there you and Jackie have really begun to implement. I recognize things that were in there, but it would, and maybe this is a future agenda item. I don't expect you to do it now, but maybe it would be good for you to report to us. One, did you respond to DOR? I don't mean you personally, but the town. And two, what do we think we ought to do and what do we think it's not so important to do? And these are all closely related to what you presented today, but they're not one for one.
Yeah, I think most of those things in that report, I think, have been addressed or in the process of being addressed. Some of them are works in progress that are never going to be fully addressed. You know, things change and you do your best and you adapt. But I think, Jerry, you might have even add that as a future agenda item, I think, at one point. So I'm happy to summarize the recommendations in that report, and then I can kind of report back as to the status in like the list form, right? So it's easy.
That would be terrific. Because it was a pretty comprehensive report. And we're taking it seriously. It's very clear. So it'd be helpful to see. And if there are things in the report that you don't think is a great idea, that would be helpful to know also.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, thanks. I've written it down for a future agenda item. George, I think your hand's up again, or did?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Rich what his plan is with respect to the adoption of these policies. Is there going to be some editing to be done? Will the Finance Committee be asked to offer additional comments? What is your plan for eventually adopting these policies?
So I got, that's Jackie's business by and large with the select board. And, so I'm sure she'll be talking about it with Art at some point to get it on their agenda. I don't know what they may want to do. I'm not a big fan of sending out stuff and then having just one meeting and expecting everything to be resolved at the one meeting. So I'm thinking this might be at least a 2-meeting type of process where, I'm introducing it to you before it gets to the select board, so you have the opportunity to comment. Rory gave me a comment that it seems certainly reasonable. I can add that in and send that change out. I would envision, after I talk to Jackie and Jackie talks to Art, that, we present similar presentation to the select board, see how they're inclined to go on that. If they're inclined to vote it that night, then I guess they would. But I would certainly be prepared, or usually would recommend that. Let's just do a presentation. Let's give it to them so they can have time to sit on it, maybe talk to folks if they want to talk to, and then have it up at a second meeting for a vote. And so, I guess it's up to you folks as to how you want to participate or not. I'm putting it out to you because I want your feedback and I want you to be involved. So, so for whatever that's worth. But anything above and beyond that, I guess that's up to Jerry and you guys to decide how you want to do it.
Well, I guess my question would be whether you and or Jackie would like to have some type of action taken by the Finance Committee that would precede presenting it to the select board. In other words, do you want us to review it and then have a vote and say we recommend to the select board that they adopt these policies, something along those lines? How do you want to strategize the presentation of these policies?
Well, yeah, I guess if everybody likes it, then that'd be great. If you don't like it, then don't take the vote. Being facetious, but that certainly sounds reasonable, and I'll talk to Jackie about that, and I'm sure she'll talk to Art when they do their agenda reviews. So, but that certainly seems like something that I'd imagine the board would be welcoming. They'd like to know that you looked at it, I'm sure, which is why I sent it out to you. And that, they don't want to be hanging out by themselves when the Finance Committee hasn't even seen the stuff. So that makes a lot of sense to me, George.
George,
one last comment. If you're going to present this to any group, you might want to correct the spelling of the word policies on the front page of the document.
Oh my God. All right, thank you.
You win, George. You get the prize for today. George, looking at this and trying to go forward and asking the committee here, Um, we've had this a while. We've heard from Rich. We've had some questions to them. Would you like, I don't know when the select board will vote or whatever, but we can always give a recommendation, even if they've already done it, because they can amend things. Would you like to add to the agenda for next, now this is for the next meeting, to have any, present any changes, anything that we might want to recommend to Rich, to talk about those a bit, and then actually have a vote on, excuse me, sorry. Have a vote on whether or not we recommend that the select board adopt, or if they have already adopted it, if we have some changes to recommend that they adopt these changes. Is that something that you would see, George, number one? And then if it is, then we will I'll poll the rest of the committee.
I didn't know, when we got this document, I didn't have any idea exactly what we were supposed to do with it at this meeting. I guess I would like to put it as an agenda item, so that, you know, everybody on this committee knows that this is going to be our opportunity to make changes or recommendations or suggestions or whatever. And then at the end of that, that we have a vote recommending to the select board the adoption of it, or in the unlikely event we didn't like it, we would say, don't do this, select board. But yeah, I would like to see it as an agenda item, because it gives all of us a clear understanding of what we're supposed to do with it at that meeting. Now, if that is not consistent with what Rich and Jackie want to do, then obviously it's in their hands. But that's the way I would like to proceed from the Finance Committee's perspective.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that, even if the select board, and I don't know if Art's still on.
He's back.
Whether the select board will act on this before, I think our next meeting is September 9th. But even if they do, I don't have any problem putting in some recommendations. I mean, that's one of the roles that we have as a finance committee. Anybody have any comment on that? In the sense that I would put this on the agenda for September 9 for discussion and a potential vote on the policies. If the policies have already been voted on, approved by and adopted by the select board, we would then, if we have any amendments, the vote would be to recommend some changes. Anybody have any issues with putting that on the next thing?
I do, Jerry.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would recommend, I certainly like George's proposal that it's would this be an agenda item, and that we either recommend its adoption or recommend the adoption with a couple of changes, whatever it turns out to be. I'm not comfortable with this going to the select board before we have a meeting on this issue. It undercuts the role of the Finance Committee. It makes us look very after the fact. It's not what Rich is trying to do. He's trying to work with us very well. So I would make a request of Rich and Art and Jackie, who's not here now. I'm sorry with the phone, but I can't either mute myself. I would make a request that this not be on the selectmen's agenda until we have a chance at our next meeting to do what George recommended. I think after the fact, when something's adopted, and then it's kind of like we're trivializing our role. It just doesn't feel right, Jerry.
All right. Well, I guess I will work to put it on the agenda. It's a little bit beyond our control. Our recommendation to Rich is to hold off on this until we until after our September 9th meeting, and we will make our recommendation at that meeting. That's our recommendation. George, I think your hand is up again.
Well, no, I just forgot to click. No,
That's okay.
I agree with what Steve said completely. So it really is it's a scheduling thing, because I don't know how this, the adoption of these policies plays into, the review by S&P of our credit rating. That's the priority. So if you have to wait until September 9th for us to make a recommendation to the select board, and then the select board at some meeting after September 9th adopts the policies. If that's not the best way to proceed for purposes of S&P, then I would certainly leave it in Rich and Jackie's hands to do it whatever way works best with S&P.
Jerry?
Rich, let me ask you a question, Rich. Would you feel more comfortable if we tried to, if I tried to call a meeting before September 9 with this as the only agenda item?
No, I think September 9th ought to be fine. I think I'll know better, hopefully by the end of this week, what the timeline is for our borrowing for the fall. And I'll let you know for sure if that changes. But I think, as long as we have them before we go out to borrow, which is going to be, the end of September, I think we'll be okay. If we're not, I'll let you know. But I think we'll be okay. And the only other suggestion I'd have is I take Steve's point for heart. I think it's right on. And I don't know how Jackie and Art might want to handle it, but perhaps at least disseminate the information to the select board and maybe just comment that this is something we're working on and we've gone to the finance committee and be working with the finance committee to finalize it. But at least it won't be the first time they've seen it at the meeting that they do have the discussion.
Yep,
Jerry?
that's fine. So
Jerry.
as a head, oh,
Jerry.
yes. Yes, Russ.
I just want to mention that September 9th is a Thursday.
That's right.
Unless we've changed
Oh.
our meeting.
No,
Number one.
okay, my
Number two,
mistake, I got the number wrong. Right, September 8th, my mistake.
number
My
two,
mistake.
number two, September 8th, I will be landing at Logan Airport at 5:05, so I will not be at that meeting.
All right,
That's okay, because the people that are really interested in this documentation have already spoken at the meeting, so.
yeah, well, that's great. It's September 8th, I may be babysitting in Portland, Oregon as well, so
That's
whatever the case. But I think you should all be ready, potentially to getting, and I'll give as much notice as possible. I have to give 48 hours, but I would like to give more than that. If Rich gets back and we need to do something before September 8th, that we can call, and since it's still before September 15th, we can have a total Zoom meeting so we can get something put together quickly. So just be aware and watch for that. If you have something coming from me that we're going to call a meeting before our regularly scheduled September 8th meeting. And I'm sorry for using the 9th instead of the 8th. It's okay. All right, anything more for Rich on this before we move on to the next item? All right, the next item is capital projects, and we already started it, so let's talk about wastewater. Peter, do you want to start with that, or Rich, maybe you have more information on that than Peter does at this point?
The only thing I was going to report was that Jane put together a meeting which I attended, and so did Art, kind of bringing everybody up to date on the various efforts that she's been working on, the alternative systems and all that. But basically the takeaway was that we're getting closer to having this targeted watershed management plan, at least the draft, completed, and Rich announced that we've got a draft. So that's the the big deal, and it'll be interesting to see what's in it.
All right, Peter, one question. In that meeting, did Jane tell you how those tests are going? I mean, the one test that I would love to come out okay is with the wood chips underneath the
Yeah. No,
the
I
leach
think-
field.
Yeah, they're going well. They're not, I don't believe that system is approved yet by the, state. It's still experimental, but the results are great, and it's really very promising. Same with the permeable reactive barrier along in front of the visitor center. It seems to be working well. They're collecting data all the time. It takes the water a long time to move down to Salt
Yeah.
Pond. So, but it's all looking good. But I'm pretty sure I heard it right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Art and Rich, but that we'll see what the plan says. But my takeaway was that we're not going to get out of this without doing some kind of a collection system for part or parts of the town, and which is going to be expensive, and then we got to figure out where to take it to be treated. So, it'd be great to see the draft to see what they come up with. But that's what I thought they were getting at.
Yeah, so we did get a draft, and I want to say last week, but it might have been 2 weeks at this point. Had a phone call with Jackie and Art and myself with the engineers to talk about that. And they essentially had 5 scenarios. And the bottom line is, yes, we do require some sort of collection system. So I think the discussion is going to be, what's that look like? How much do you want to do? And then, having done this in Yarmouth, the phase after that is, once you've decided on the big picture of what you want to have implemented, you kind of talk about the approach and the phasing of it, which is a significant factor in how you pay for a system, right? So in Yarmouth, for example, we had to make it affordable and to take advantage of debt drop-off and not overburden any one taxpayer, too much money all at once. I had it divided into 8 phases, one every 5 years. So with the philosophy that, we didn't cause this problem overnight, and we weren't going to get out of it overnight. And so to make it affordable, we had a stream of funding sources that funded the plan. We broke it down into 8 phases, one every 5 years, and kept in mind, which I'm sure we're going to have to do here, is the whole idea of what's called adaptive management. So Peter, you mentioned the Title V George Hoyfelter system. That's not going to be part of anything we can get approved through SRF or DEP in the near term. But if we broke it as something into 2, 3, or 4 phases, maybe by the time we got to a future phase in a more less densely packed area, it might become part of a solution. So what you start with isn't going to be what you end up with in this type of project. But we do have to have a management plan that addresses the need that they've identified, which is to remove nitrogen, which is we're going to require some level of a collection system.
All right, that was, thank you for that cheery report.
Yes. Rich?
Yes.
I'd like to ask Rich a question, Jerry.
Yeah, good, Russ.
Rich, the other thing that you presented to us was the financial management policies. And one of the questions I had in there was under debt management policy, there was a sentence that said, however, credit rating agencies consider debt service exceeding 20% of net operating revenues as a potential problem. And the question I had is, have we factored into our projection future wastewater costs sewering? And does it appear to be a problem keeping under 20%? My guess is the answer is no, based on the fact that you're looking to section it out into, 8 different sections, but I'm really not sure.
So no, I haven't got, the capital plan and projections I did last year didn't contemplate anything but some ongoing planning work for wastewater.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that we'll have the information. I'll have a a planning number for this fall for these upcoming projections. But nothing definitive, especially the timing of it all.
Yep.
So this may or may not happen this year. It'll probably happen at some level, but with a low degree of certainty on it. And then the following year, I think we'll have a lot more certainty.
Certainly.
But I can tell you, I already have scheduled all the debt in the water project. And I think it's 2024 is where we hit our peak of debt service. And then we have a
That's correct.
substantial amount of drop off, what I call debt drop off. So, and I forget the exact numbers, but something in the magnitude of our peak might be about $7.3 million. And then the next year it goes down to $6.8 million. And then it goes down to $6.4 million. And so, the timing of the phasing is super important because as that debt drops off, that's when you want to be ramping up the new debt and try to keep an even keel so that nobody gets a big spike or a big burden all at once.
Right.
How about the debt for the high school, Rich? Does that have to get added in as well?
I have to add that in too, yeah.
That's not going away, Peter.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that one. Okay, well, Peter, since you raised the high school, anything new on the high school, even though that's not a specific Eastham capital project?
Yeah, the architects are busy trying to finalize the plans, develop and finalize the plans. We are trying to, we're going to bid on some portable classrooms that are available from another school district. And it would be great if we could get those because it's just what we need. And if we do get those, we'll be able to do the project in 2 phases as opposed to 3. So kind of take apart half the school and put half of it in the portables, and then after that phase is done, then do the other half and put them in the portables. So, but that's sort of up in the air. I think we have a good chance of getting those classrooms, but it's got to go out to public bid, so we're not sure. And that's the big stuff that's happening. And yeah.
When do they envision construction starting?
Should know that off the top of my head. I think the portables would be coming over next summer. So 22. So I think they'll be starting the fall of 22, but don't quote me.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Yeah, that's my remembrance.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Next one, what about any more news on Rock Harbor, Tom?
I don't have an update for you, Jerry. The
All right.
meeting that we were going to have on Monday got canceled. And
Okay.
I'm told our next meeting is going to be scheduled for September 7th. So we haven't met since June 7th, as I recall. So it's been a little while. And,
Yeah.
maybe we ought to take the summer off.
That's no problem. Looking at water, I don't know if Russ,
We have not had
water-
we have not had another meeting, so there's nothing new from my end to report.
Yeah, well, Rich, I've got a question on water that neighbors asked me. That my understanding was after phase 1, that all our contracts had for not just filling what was patching what was dug up, but then paving that half of the road. I mean, we have done put some stuff in the budget for phase 1 to start paving roads. Is that true, and has it happened? Because we've seen contracts around where I live, Aspinett Road particularly, which is a washboard, where the contract's over, people now hooking up water and they're not repaving. And I just wanted to know what's up, if I can get an update on what's up in the contracts on repaving roads that have been dug up.
So is that a current contract, Jerry? So a current contract, someone's been hooked up and the road hasn't been paved yet?
Yeah, the current contract is up because people can hook up the water. I think you could, and there's an end date on water hookup of March, which means the contract's over. So I don't know.
I think, I don't know, I could follow up, but usually it's because they're not going to do the paving in the summer.
Okay,
So maybe it'd be one of
that's
those
fine.
things, they come back in the fall. and do it.
Yeah, that's a question I'll answer to a neighbor at some time in the future, but just, you know it.
Jerry, Jerry,
Yes,
just a comment on that. If that-
Russ and then Steve. Go ahead.
if that road was done in phase one, then more than likely, the paving was not done. And the paving will be done later. The paving in phase one will be done after, if it's not already done, will be done after the phase two paving is done. That's my
Yeah, no,
understanding.
Yeah, my understanding, part of that road was phase one, part is phase two. Steve?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to build on that. The last time we had a discussion about the phase one backbone work,
Right,
which did not include repaving, was
Right.
that Jackie and Rich very much wanted to make sure that happened.
yes.
So my question is, have we allocated or identified budget to make that happen? Or is
Alright,
it still a wish?
So right now, there's, the prior phases up to this point have had significant savings, and the current phases under work now are on budget, if not having some degree of savings. So if that were to hold, then we'd have unspent money from prior phases that would still be available, and that's what we would use to go back and do the phase one paving.
That's helpful. And I think that's consistent with what you presented whenever we had this discussion. But I would make a request, Rich, when we're preparing is it fiscal 22 now or fiscal 23, the next budget?
We're in 23, the next. budget's
23 will be the
23.
next one. If you haven't identified sufficient funds, I would hope we would consider having that in the next year's budget.
Okay.
To be sure that we could get this done. And as a disclosure, I'm on one of those roads, but I think there are hundreds of us, so I'm not alone on that. Anyway.
Yeah,
And I know the intent of management is to get this done, and I appreciate that.
okay, great. Next one, it's not a capital project at the moment, but any update on town center, Rich?
I know Jackie has been working on it and finalizing the purchase and sale. I don't know that it's perfectly finalized at this point, but it's made progress, and I think she's targeting the end of September to have that close. So we're on track, last I heard.
Good.
And I did do some research, and this is just a interesting thing from finance. There's a called the Municipal Reform Act passed a couple years ago. So something triggered my memory, and I went through and scoured some of that information. And there is a provision that allows us to take rental of municipal real estate, rents from rental of municipal real estate, and putting in a revolving fund, and to pay in order to pay for expenditures associated with maintaining that building. So that might be something I come to you in the future to make sure you're supportive of, because the conventional wisdom was because the default is always that every receipt's a general fund receipt. And so if it went into the general fund, we wouldn't have an appropriation to pay for repairs and maintenance. You know, we could swing it, we could manage it, but a revolving fund might be a better option because we'll have the monthly rents going into there and be able to spend directly out of that instead of having to add to the budget for the property. So just a accounting convention that I have to contemplate and let you know about once we get to that point.
So you'd have to set up some sort of special fund to receive the rental receipts.
Yeah, it should be a separate, it's called a special revenue fund on our general ledger, yeah.
And then, and those funds would be limited for repairs on those buildings, or what we have to spend on that property.
Right.
That's a good idea.
All right, now I think I've hit all the capital projects that we have.
Jerry?
So, yeah,
Peter, let me give you a little bit better answer about that timing question on the high school.
Okay,
There's various deadlines, about 60% completion of the construction documents, 100% completion. But the bottom line is it's going out to bid May of 2022. And they've got 2.5 months blocked out for bidding for the general contractor and the subcontractors. So the plan is to really start the project in the summer of 22.
Okay.
Bring in the portables, but also start the demo and get rolling.
yeah, yeah. Okay, Stephen,
There was some bad news about the,
Okay.
construction costs because of the cost of steel mainly, how it's spiked. But it's not going to affect the project because we're locked in at that number. We have to figure out a way to get it built for the money that's been voted. And maybe the steel will come back somewhat like lumber has.
Steve?
Yeah, I just want to mention some research I did right before this meeting. The consolidation of the capital projects committees that would occur once our charter, revised charter is approved, was reported out by the legislative committees on August 2nd. And it is now with the scheduling committee. Who knew that there was a scheduling committee? And I presume that's a committee that schedules 4 votes.
Yes,
So
I imagine.
it sounds logical
Right.
anyway. So we're getting there. God
Right,
willing, we'll all still be here.
Right, one of these days, we'll have to try and appoint 2 people to that committee.
Right.
Okay. Going to the next, was the town administrator report. Rich, anything you want to report that we haven't discussed yet? Any updates?
No, just a couple of things that have happened affecting FY22. I just want to give you a little notice, so I pull it together maybe for next month or so. You've had a little forewarning. I'm gonna get you a memo from the police chief regarding staffing of police officers and dispatch. He's hired a dispatcher to become a police officer. And there's actually a cost savings budget-wise to do it the way he did it. Just the money's not in the right place. So I might give you that memo just to put you on notice that that would be a year-end transfer. We're good for the money. The money's there, it's just not in the right line. So unless you had an objection to it, I just want to give you the notice so that when you hear it in the spring, it's not the first time you heard it. We've identified the issue now, and just want to give you that. And then we did get billed just came in unexpected bill. Well, unexpected in the sense that, I guess we should have expected it, but they never billed us for 2 years for the retirement assessment for the Tri-Town plant. That portion. I went back and looked, and I did budget for it in 21 and 22. In the prior years, it hadn't been. So I must have heard about this and known about this somehow. But the bill never came in from the accountant retirement system. So on the 21 piece, I'm sorry, they're billing us for FY20 and 21, I'm sorry. And so for the 21 piece, we're fine because I've encumbered that money. The books haven't closed yet, so I can pay that 21 bill. But there's will be an unpaid amount from FY20. And so I might, I got to contemplate how we're going to handle that one. So that might be something that comes in front of you as well.
How big is that item?
How much is it?
Probably about 40 grand.
Oh, my God.
Won't you need town meeting approval to pay a prior year's bill?
Potentially.
Well, that's an
Yep.
80% vote also.
Yeah, 90%, I think.
Well,
Or 4/5.
whichever it is, it's a
Okay.
big super majority.
You're right.
80%. Well, yeah, it's a super majority, yeah.
But it's interesting, kind of on the heels of our discussion last time, that 40 grand, it's all on retirees. Obviously, the plant shut down, everyone's, no longer works there. So this is catch-up contributions for people that retired that money hasn't been set aside for. That's why we're getting assessed it. And they, send us a 2-year bill. Now, that's what I gotta look into, Steve, it's for FY20, but is it really a bill until they bill you? I don't know. There might be a legal question there because it's not is an assessment if you're not assessed.
I think the tree's falling in the forest. Is that what you're saying? And nobody's there.
Yes, well, fortunately, you have a town attorney and we can ask them on that one and see how it goes. Listen, Rich, before you were here, we had a payment to Eversource for a late bill or some bill or something, and the town initially voted it down. It was a bill we had to pay for before, and they voted down, and Steve was the moderator, and if you raise it or revote within 45 minutes or whatever the magic number is, I can't remember, Steve, and we did it, and finally we said, look, it's the bill we have to pay. And finally, they got the votes. But yeah, we had some problems with stuff going back like that.
Well, God bless Massachusetts law. But the fact of the matter is, if the town continued to vote it down, some judge would have ordered us to pay it. It's a legal obligation we have.
Yeah, I know.
However.
So anyway, that's the stuff. All right, going on to future agenda items. I think I've got them. The DOR report, you're going to have a year-end report for September, Rich, or do you want to push that off to October?
We could probably do it in September. I mean, once we get into October, we're going to be hot and heavy on, budget season. So
yeah, okay. So we'll do that. What about the financial management policy will be at the next meeting, whenever that is. And if I have a special meeting, it'll only be on that subject to make it short. And the DOR report, would you like to have that in September? I mean, Steve, you and I would clearly like to discuss that, but is September a good time or is that too soon? Am I throwing too much in September?
I would defer to Rich and Jackie in terms of their time and what else they need to accomplish.
Right.
There's not an urgency to it. It's just important. We should be considering it. So
Right.
When I summarize the recommendations and the status, and we can at least do that in September, Jerry. And then if you want to do more
Okay.
from there, we can.
All
I
right.
thought that's what isn't that what I agreed to in the first item you said? Maybe I misheard you. What was the first item then?
The first item was you were going to do some year-end review of what 20, the numbers I keep, what FY21 ended up being. Yeah.
So that might be too soon because that I want to work with Tina, our town accountant on.
Okay, I won't put that one on. I'll put the DOR. Okay, that's good. Anybody else want to try and get on that September? Okay. For looking at September 9th, it's September 8th. Excuse me. Sorry, Russ. Looking at September 8th, it's before September 15th. Do you want to have a Zoom meeting again on September 8th? Or do you want to try and meet? If you meet, I will have to join via remotely because unless COVID messes things up, I'll be able to see my grandchildren in Portland, Oregon for the first time in 2 years during that time span. So I will be there. But do you want to Zoom?
So Jerry,
Is that okay, everyone?
Peter, so I'm going to miss that meeting as well. Actually, I'm flying to Portland on that day, Oregon. So I'll look you up, but you have to have a quorum in person, right? Or do you?
No,
we do it all Zoom. You
not
don't.
If we do it all
If we go 100%
Zoom.
Zoom, we don't.
So you probably want to do it Zoom then, so you be sure you have a quorum.
Yeah, okay. We'll do that. Steve, if for some reason I get stuck, you'd run the meeting, but I think I can, September 8th should be fine for me.
Well, I'm of course, happy to do that. With the problem is, even though I raised the question of us having this meeting before the select board met, I'm going to be traveling back from Boston, which I think I will get here on time. But
All right, look,
it's a medical appointment that day. So I don't know
Yeah.
if we want to change the date. I mean, that's also. a
yeah,
possibility.
we can potentially change the date. I'll send something out and look about, look, because Russ can't be there, Pete can't be there.
And
I'm gonna
several of
be
us are
in
traveling.
Oregon, but I'll probably be there.
And
Yeah.
Rich, unless I've got this wrong, while we were having that discussion earlier about the relationship of our meeting and the select board, I went to the public calendar on the town's website. And it looks to me like the select board doesn't meet again until like the 15th or whatever. Let's see, the
13.
13th of September.
Oh.
Because
I
they
get- yeah,
canceled their August 16th meeting.
I guess they canceled the next one, so,
Yeah, according to the calendar, it says canceled.
yeah, I know Jackie
But
was
I didn't
talking about
find
that.
any other meeting before that September one.
Yeah, so I guess we're good then on that sequence, so.
But if we need to pick a date, Jerry, that we could have better attendance from our committee, and if we do it by Zoom, maybe you could, I don't know, however you want to do it to ascertain whether there's a better time and date.
Yeah, let's see, because that week, that's Labor Day week. And that's the Wednesday. Pete, would you be, the 7th might be, the 7th is tough for me, I think. No, the 7th I could probably do. I can't keep trying to think now. That would be 5, would be 2 o'clock. That might be tough. But what about the next day, the 9th, Peter, when you're already in Portland? Are you busy and won't be able to be free?
Yeah, that would be tough. I'm gonna be
That'd be tough.
touring on a motorcycle. I don't know where I'll be.
What about the first?
Avoiding,
What about
avoiding the.
before? What about
avoiding
the
the smoke.
first, Jerry?
The 1st of September, I would have to join by Zoom, but I'll be in Chicago, but I can do it at 4 o'clock from Chicago. The 1st is fine for me, other than, wait a minute, we have a CP,
CPA meeting.
PTA meeting.
Yeah.
Community Preservation Act meeting.
Jerry, do you ever use the Doodle poll app?
I did.
Because
I
that's
did
the
at
way
one
to
point.
recommend 3 or 4 different possibilities and send it to everyone, and or 5 possibilities, whatever you choose.
And then get it.
And
So
then you
I don't
can
know
see
if I-
it graphically.
Right. Steve, could you set that up? Because I'm not, have you
I
done
can
that?
set
How
it
to
up,
do it?
but I don't know that I'm the one to pick the possible dates and times.
Well,
I'm happy to, but it's not my
you-
role, really.
you and I can discuss it after you get the responses. Could
Well,
you
no,
set up
here's what I recommend. You and I communicate to pick 4 or 5 potential dates and times.
Yeah,
And when you're comfortable with them, I'm happy to organize the doodle poll.
all right, we'll do that offline. That's great.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
happy to help.
We'll get it. So you'll look at the doodle stuff, guys, and we'll be fine. Is there any new business? Any other new business anyone wants to raise? Hearing none. Somebody say something? Did I miss something? Mary?
I don't, this isn't new business, but I want to ask Rich, I saw all of the equipment at the town hall a couple of weeks ago, and looks as if the EV charging stations, at least at the town hall, have been hooked up. And I have a question about the ones at the library.
Yeah, it's the bane of my existence at the moment. I have to
Eversource.
rely on the mercy of Eversource to show up and do it and then not change their minds and redo it 3 times. I don't think that I think they're done with all the work at town hall, but they still have to energize the transformer. So that's just a matter of time. And then the last update I got regarding the ones at the library is probably gonna take a little bit more time because they have to replace a whole pole that Verizon owns the pole, and so they gotta coordinate with Verizon to change all the wires and cables over to the new pole. And so that one's turned into a bit of fiasco, but
All right,
you know, I'm glad Eversource owns it, not the town of East Jam.
Yeah.
all right. Any other new business? All right, do I hear? Thank you all for joining. It's great to see you all, and we'll be back in touch with a new date. And do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move.
That's Steve.
Second,
And do I hear a second? And
second,
that's Russ.
Russ.
Yep, Russ was the second. We'll have to go by roll call. Steve,
Yes.
Roy,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Russ,
yes.
George,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
and Jerry is a yes at 9-0. And have a great week. We'll see you in September.